I'm a detective. I was called to a domestic dispute between a husband and a wife. Their son told me they eat people. The report lay on my desk. The words were printed there in stark black ink. Domestic disturbance, 14 Seabird Lane, Cormorant's Perch Island. And below were the names, Elias and Alara Vance. A domestic on the perch. That's a new one, I said, and the springs of my chair groaned under my weight. They usually handle their own business. Sergeant O'Malley worked his crossword and did not look up. He had a face creased with a permanent judgment against the world and all its doings. Noise complaint came from their nearest neighbor, Old Man Hemlock, said they were going at it loud enough to scare the gulls off his roof. A lot of smashing, apparently. The Vances haven't been answering the line since. He raised his head, and in his eyes you could see the pale, flat blue of a winter sky over a dead ocean. You're up, Harper. Me, don't you think sending a familiar face like Gibbs might be better? Those folks are particular. Gibbs has got a multi-car pile-up on the causeway, O'Malley said. And you need to learn how to deal with the particulars if you ever want to make a career in this coastal jurisdiction. It's just a lover's quarrel. Go over there, knock some heads, tell them to keep it down, and be back before lunch. He nodded with his chin toward the pistol on my hip. And you know the islanders' rules about mainland formalities. Leave that here. It spooks them. You want me to go to an island known for its hostility to outsiders to mediate a potentially violent domestic dispute, unarmed. It's not hostile, it's private, he said. And they're not savages, Alex. They're fishermen and farmers who want to be left alone. A uniform is authority enough. Now go. I rose and unclipped the sidearm from my belt. The island was a 20-minute boat ride from mainland. The 100 or so that lived there lived by their own reckonings. They schooled their children in a one-room house and sent them out onto the water when they came of age. They bartered and they kept to themselves, and they only crossed to the mainland for what the island couldn't provide. They had their own laws and an old man to speak them, and for their trouble to find its way to our desks on the mainland meant the trouble was serious. The deck of the ferry was cold beneath my feet. A low gray mist lay upon the water and shrouded all things from sight. It muffled the drone of the engine and swallowed the world until the mainland dissolved into a smear of gray behind us. The perch grew out of the void ahead, a dark upthrust of rock and pine that clawed at the sky. Then you could see the houses, bleached white things that clung to the stone or clustered near the harbor like seafoam caught in a crevice. An old woman sat hunched on a bench in a thick wool shawl. She was the only other soul aboard, and she looked at the water and not at me, and she did not speak. When the ferry groaned and nudged the dock timbers, I was the only one to stand. I stepped onto the wet wood, and the air was another air altogether. The salt of it and the reek of pine and the smoke of wood fires burning somewhere beyond the stony rise. An older quiet was here. No sound of cars, no human call, just the wind and the gulls. Some men in oilskins and heavy sweaters worked on nets by a beached boat. Their hands moved with a slowness that bespoke a world without clocks. They stopped their work to watch me come ashore, and their eyes read the blue uniform, and then they turned away. No word. I looked at a faded map that was nailed to a post by the dock. Seabird Lane was at the far end of the village, and I set out on that path. The houses were old things built to stand against the wind, and the sea scrubbed clean against the rot, and nets lay draped on fences like grave shrouds. There were gardens starved by the salt wind, but still showing color. I saw faces in the dark glass of windows, pale specters that watched my passing and then were gone. And then I saw the house, 14 Seabird Lane. It was a cottage like the others, but set apart from them. In the garden, a clay pot lay shattered upon the stone walk, and its dark soil was spilled out amongst the ruin of red flowers. Through a window left open to the wind, I could hear the sounds. A man's low rumble and a woman's sharp answer. They were still at it. I drew a lungful of cold air to ready myself, and I knocked my fist against the door. Inside, all sounds stopped. A long quiet. Then the door groaned on its hinges and opened into the dark of the house. The man who stood in the doorframe was a wall of bulk and weathered hide that filled the space of the door. He wore a beard, and his hands were the size of quarry stones, stained about the quicks of his nails with a blackness like engine grease or old blood. This would be Elias Vance. His eyes held a hard light, but when they fell upon the blue of my uniform, some of that light seemed to fail, leaving behind what might have been shame or only surprise. In the dimness of the house beyond him, a woman stood with her arms crossed over her. Her hair was red, and it was twisted up in a knot at the back of her head. On the floorboards near her feet lay a broken plate. "Elias Vance," I said. "I'm Detective Alex Harper from the Mainland Precinct. We received a complaint about a disturbance." He gave a noise in his throat that was not a word and stepped back from the door. I entered into a smell of brine and stewed herbs, and some other scent beneath that was the scent of the house itself, of old wood and old sorrows. The space was neat except for the evidence of their war. The broken plate, a stool overturned on its side, and on the stairs that climbed into the darkness of the second floor, a boy sat watching us with wide and unnervingly still eyes. "There's no need for mainland business here," Alara Vance said. "My husband and I were having a private discussion. That gossip Hemlock should learn to mind his own business." "A discussion that involves breaking things and shouting loud enough for your neighbors to hear is no longer private, ma'am," I said. "I do not want to put this in a report. I only want to know what happened and see that everyone is okay. Is anyone hurt?" Elias stared at the floorboards and his jaw was tight. It was the woman who spoke. "He gets these fits of temper, it's how he is. He believes I am careless." "Careless with what?" I asked. "With our traditions," Elias said. His voice was a low rumble from the pit of his chest. "She forgets the importance of things. She becomes lenient." His eyes were on her then, a look that was not simple anger but a deeper and more searing judgment, as if she had broken some covenant between them. "The traditions haven't kept our stores full for the winter, have they?" she said. "Sometimes you have to adapt, be practical." All right, I said, holding up my hands as if to ward off a blow. "Look, I can tell you're both passionate people. I'm not here to take sides or to pry into your island ways. I'm only here to make sure disagreements don't become dangerous. Has there been any physical violence? Elias, did you lay a hand on your wife?" "Never," he said. He looked at me as if the question itself were the offense. "I would never harm Alara." "And you, Alara?" I asked, turning to her. "Did you feel threatened?" She drew a breath and her gaze moved from my face to her husband's and back again as if weighing two different kinds of trouble. "He is loud," she said. "But other than that, no, detective, he did not hurt me." "Then I am calling it a quarrel that went past its bounds," I said. "But I will have to file a minor report. You should know that if we are called back to this house for this reason, the law will take a harder hand. Do you understand?" They both gave a short, silent nod. The fury had not left the room, but it had drawn back into the corners. A strange and weary quiet took its place. Elias went to the spot on the floor and he knelt, and with his great hands began to gather the larger shards of the plate. The woman watched him for a long moment, and a look passed over her face that I could not read. And then she turned and went into the kitchen, and I heard the scrape of a kettle being set upon the stove. I was scratching a note in my book when I felt the weight of his stare. The boy on the stairs had not moved. He sat pale in the gloom and lost inside his clothes. His eyes were like holes burned in a blanket. The argument had taken root in him in a way it had not in his parents. The peace had been made, such as it was. I could take the afternoon ferry back across the water and set the strange accounting of it down on paper. I snapped the book shut and I slipped the weight of it into my coat. The woman Alara returned from the darkness of the kitchen. She would not meet my eye, but looked instead toward her husband as he stood like a beast of burden by the door. "Elias, fetch some driftwood for the evening fire," she said, and her voice was not a wife's request, but a command given to dismiss him from her sight, so she might offer up some parting lie of peace before sending me from her house. Elias looked at me a final time, and the storm was still in his face, but he gave a curt nod of his head and turned and was gone out the back door into the gray light. When he was gone, it was as if some great weight had been lifted from the low timbers of that house. "Thank you for your visit, Detective Harper," Alara said, and her voice was softer now. "I am sorry for the trouble." "It's no trouble at all, ma'am. I just want to ensure things remain peaceful here," I said, and I moved toward the door. "Domestic disputes can be unsettling for everyone, especially children." I turned my head to where the boy still sat on the stairs. "Is he doing all right?" "Finn is a sensitive boy," she said, and she made a gesture with her hand as if shooing a fly, as if his nature were a defect she had learned to abide. "He has an active imagination." As I stood on the threshold, I felt a sudden and urgent claim on the hem of my coat. I turned, and the boy was there. He stood behind me with a strange look on his face. He looked past me into the house to where his mother worked by the hearth, and he made sure she was not looking. "I need to tell you something," he whispered. I crouched down and looked into his face. "What is it, Finn? You can tell me." He leaned to me, and his hand was a small, cold fist, clenching the cloth of my jacket. His eyes were wild with a terror that had no place in the heart of a child. "They're not fighting about what you think," he whispered. "It's about people from the mainland. It's always about them." "What about them, Finn?" He swallowed, and his gaze flew to the gray and twisted trees. Then he leaned so close his lips were nearly at my ear. "My mom and dad," he said. "They eat them. They eat people from the mainland." The words landed in the plain air, and they meant nothing. The notion of it. Cannibalism. On an island a stone's throw from a modern American town, it was preposterous. It had to be a child's interpretation of something ugly he'd heard. I set the words aside as you would a piece of stone that did not fit the wall you were building. I reached out, and with a gentle pull, I loosened his hand from my coat. I gave him a smile. "Hey, it's all right," I said. "Grown-ups say some pretty scary-sounding things when they're angry, don't they? Sometimes it sounds like they could eat each other alive. It's just an expression. It doesn't mean it's real. Your parents love you and they don't eat anyone, I promise." But the boy was not comforted. He looked at me, and his face collapsed into a mask of pure and desolating grief. It was the look of a true believer who has been met with apostasy. The tears stood in his eyes but did not fall. "No," he whispered. "You don't understand. You don't understand." He turned from me then and fled, his small feet in their socks making no sound on the wood of the floor, and he was gone up the stairs into the shadows of the house. I stood and turned my back. I had done my work here. It was time to leave this quiet desolation and return to the mainland where things could be measured and made sense of. I began to walk, but the boy's whisper went with me. It was a stubborn and unwelcome shadow that the sun could not burn away. The boy's words had planted a seed of disquiet in my mind, and while I told myself that this was a child's fiction born from a house of unhappy truth, reason would not set my heart at ease. I told myself that the human mind will invent monsters to explain the sorrows of the world, for the monsters can be slain. I was halfway to the ferry landing where the gray water lapped at the timbers of the dock when a voice called out to me, a voice rich and warm. "Detective, a moment if you would be so kind." I turned and saw an old man seated upon a bench that had been hewn from a single great log of driftwood. He had a beard that flowed down his chest, white as seafoam, and his eyes were a startling and brilliant blue. In his hands he held a piece of wood and a small knife, and from the wood he was coaxing the shape of a bird. His smile was not like the other faces I had seen here. It was a true and genuine thing that creased the old map of his face, and it was a thing that could disarm a man before he knew he had been armed. He radiated a calm and settled authority. This was the island's elder. "Good day, sir," I said, and I walked to where he sat. "Detective Alex Harper, you must be Malachi." "Indeed I am," he replied. His voice was a deep and comforting burr. "And I would guess, from the grim set of your shoulders as you arrived and the slightly less troubled look upon you now, that you have successfully poured oil on the troubled waters at the Vance household." "Something like that," I said. "It seems to have been settled for the time being. Hopefully they'll keep it down from now on." "Elias has a hard head and Alara a sharp tongue," Malachi said, and he chuckled low in his chest as his knife continued its deft and practiced work. "It is an unfortunate pairing of temperaments at times, but their hearts are true to our ways. We are grateful you made the trip, detective. It relieves me of having to deliver a harsher island judgment." He stopped his work then and looked up at me, and his gaze was both kind and possessed of a deep and knowing power. "But you look weary from your journey. You are already headed back to the mainland then? What a pity." "Well, my work here is done, and—" I let the words fall away, for I would not tell this man that his island had creeped me out. "But your visit is so short," Malachi exclaimed, and a look of true disappointment crossed his face. "You mainlanders are always in such a rush. You never stop to truly see our little world. It truly is a shame because you arrive on our shores at a most auspicious time. Our annual Harvest Festival is in just 2 days." He said the words Harvest Festival as if they were a benediction, and his eyes took on a light of deep and holy reverence. "It is the highlight of our year," he said. "A celebration of the sea's bounty, the season's turn. There is music, dancing, a great feast. It is a spectacle I assure you cannot be found anywhere on your side of the water. Wait for part 2.